Hello and welcome to this special spin-off of the Rugby League Coach podcast, Costo and Coach, part one of a three-part trilogy, where we are going to talk about all things from a worldwide rugby league perspective. I'm joined by a man who is, well, it's probably fair to say, rugby league's most culturally diverse commentator. Is it since 1988 you've called the game? Was that the year that the Newcastle Knights came in the comp, Jason Costigan?
Yes, hello, Lee. G'day, kia ora, bulla, Persian dentier to our Albanian audience. Not sure how many people are watching in Tirana, but
no.
1988 was the year of the Newcastle Knights joining the competition alongside the Gold Coast and the Brisbane Broncos. And no, I was not calling the Winfield Cup back in those days, you smarty pants. But Lee, as a matter of trivia, whatever you dug up there is actually right, because in what is now Channel 7 in my hometown of Mackay, the sugar capital, that's produced many fine rugby league player, Wendell Saylor, Dale Shearer, Kevin Campion, grand final hero from the Raiders, Steve Jackson. I could go on and on. I was calling rugby league when I was still at school back in 1988, and here we are all these years later.
Well, I've got it here that you were 16. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you have a moustache?
No. Despite the crossbreeding, I am the son of an immigrant, and very proud of that. We have plenty of our sons and daughters of immigrants who are playing rugby league, but not all of them have a connection to the first fleet, as in the first white people that came to Australia. So I'm intergenerational Aussie in that regard, but on my father's side, I'm the son of an immigrant who came out from the former Yugoslavia in 1964. I have a stepmother from North Macedonia. I had a Maltese stepfather. I have Maltese sisters. My father sailed from Italy in 1964, and here we are. So, rugby league's a beautiful thing, Lee. And as you know, it's not just the UK, New Zealand, Australia, and France, and Papua New Guinea, if you like, playing in a World Cup. We've just had a World Cup with so many nations, so many continents, so many cultures. And it's quite fascinating in the last couple of years since I've come back to broadcasting the game, Lee, to witness what has happened in the years that I've been away. It's so exciting, and it gets the blood pumping through my veins.
Mate, I'm going to talk to you about that soon. You've commentated on a World Cup final. 50 internationals I've got here, 200 NRL games, mostly on Fox and Sky. You've done a grand final. Which one was it?
Yeah, it was 2002. So it was 20 years ago, a couple of months ago. 20 years ago, it was quite surreal to look back on that, to have the legendary Ray Warren in the box next to us. Ray's obviously there, an ornament of the game, a doyen of commentators, calling the game for the Nine Network in Australia. And here's me, new kid on the block, if you like, working with my Kiwi colleagues, broadcasting that grand final between the Roosters and the Warriors for Sky TV in New Zealand. And, of course, the Warriors, it was their first grand final. Kevin Campion and Ivan Cleary, Stacey Jones with that amazing individual piece of brilliance.
Mozza whacked someone.
Yeah, someone. Not just someone, Lee. Check the number plate. I'm not sure how many people who are watching are members of the Brad Fittler fan club, but Villa the Gorilla, Richard Villasanti, he thought he was going to have Brad Fittler for breakfast.
If you follow Mr. Jason Costigan on Twitter, it's at Costo Jason with a capital C and a capital J, and Insta at Jason Costigan. If they did follow you on those platforms, mate, they'd see you've just been to Fiji.
Yeah, I have. It was my second trip in 3 months, Lee, and the first trip was back in September, calling the Vodafone Cup Grand Final at Lawanga Park, which is in the rugby town of Totoka, lovely Singatoka on the Coral Coast. And Bula Vinaka to everybody in the Fijian Islands who might be tuning in. Great to have you with us. And Vinaka Vakalevu for your wonderful hospitality. I've actually got an extended Fijian family over there, Lee, in all seriousness, in the village of Namanda. Neville Costigan, who will ring a bell with you,
yes,
is in fact my fourth cousin.
I was going to ask, is he a relation?
Yeah, well, his mother is a Papua New Guinean lady, and he was born in Rabaul, but he was raised by his father in later life alongside his stepmother being Fijian. So Neville actually spent a big chunk of his life in the village that was my home for a week recently, before going back to Australia to do his secondary schooling near my hometown of Mackay, and obviously moving into rugby league and becoming pretty good at it, and eventually being part of that premiership winning side with Wayne Bennett at St George Illawarra back in 2010, and also another career highlight captaining the country where he was born. So, but I did call the Vodafone Cup Grand Final in Fiji back in September. It was a great day between the Nandera Panthers and also the Saru Dragons. A big shout out to the Nandera Panthers team and the club, particularly the Dakutonga family, because it was a great achievement. They didn't look like winning, but they got there in the end. And then, of course, just recently, Lee, I had the privilege of calling the Fijian Cup Nines, the Rugby League Nines tournament, from the same venue, and it was live on television into 3 countries, live into Australia on KO, live onto the platform in New Zealand that you know as Sky Television. Great to be back on Sky. Kia ora to all the bros over there. First time back on Sky in 12 years and live on Fiji 1. So it was a great experience with Mills Muliaina in the commentary box with me. We were sweating.
Who's that? Mills?
All Black legend himself.
Wow. Okay.
And we never met each other previously. We obviously knew of each other from his days playing for the All Blacks and my days working for Sky TV in New Zealand for a decade. And we only met on the day at the venue and then basically hammed up in the commentary box for a couple of days with one little fan, a little fan behind us trying to keep us cool in 99% humidity in that commentary box.
Mate, I've got my Poland shirt on. It has got the European Federation logo on as well. So I've put this shirt on especially today because we are going to delve into the international scene, which is obviously very pertinent right now on the back of a World Cup that we are going to dissect something chronic, JC. But there's just one thing I really want to drill down into before we start on that. You've had a bit of a hiatus from the media.
Yeah, yep.
Doing other things. We won't, doesn't matter what you did, but you were doing other things. Talk to us about how that media world changed from when you left it to when you returned. So what year did you do your last sort of report or commentary or?
Well, I had a 10-year break from the game, and the answer is if people are wondering, I went into politics and, it's a dog-eat-dog business. If you think coaching is cutthroat, Lee, and I know that you've got some very out-there views on who's the next coach to be sacked and who needs to be sacked and all that. And I enjoy seeing your social media work like so many people out there and seeing what the coach has to say.
That's right.
But I was in politics for 10 years and I won 3 elections and then my 4th one I lost, and I probably had my back up against the wall there and trying to win in what was difficult circumstances. And it is a grubby game. And I miss rugby league. I miss calling the game. I used to go to watch the Cowboys play. I'd watch the Mackay Cutters play. I'd go to State of Origin. In fact, I wrote to the Queensland Rugby League when I was the MP for Whitsunday, and I actually appealed to the QRL to bring the State of Origin team to my own electorate of Whitsunday. And guess what? The wish was granted. I remember when Troy Morton from the QRL back in those days said to me, Costo, guess what? They're going to rubber stamp it today. I was pulling up at a petrol station on the Bruce Highway about 1,100 kilometres north of Brisbane. So I kept connected with the game, Lee, but I miss calling the game. And then obviously when I lost my last election, number 4, I said, right, I'm going back to what I love. And so my last game calling before basically the hiatus was calling with what is now Triple M in North Queensland, in Cairns, Townsville and Mackay and Rockhampton, heading up the Cowboys call team. That's since been taken up that role by Wade Chiesa, who's a great young fella, young in the sense of callers out there and doing a great job. And so I came back a couple of years ago, and since then we've called NRL, a bit of NRL with SENZ, the sister network to SEN in Australia. So my thanks to Jeremy and the SEN team for that great opportunity to call NRL in the last 12 months or so, but also calling International Rugby League. In the last couple of years, we've called 2 Irish Grand Finals. We've called the Fijian Grand Final. We've called the Serbian Grand Final. We've called the Grand Final in Ukraine. That was before the Russians invaded, obviously. And so with the power of technology, that's coming back to your question, Lee, the world has changed. I never thought I'd call a grand final sitting in Melbourne, calling through pictures coming in from Kharkiv in Ukraine. There's a commentator at the ground. This is a stadium that was bombed by the Nazis during World War II and in more recent times bombed by the Russians. Well, October 14 months ago, the only bombs were coming off the 5/8 of the of the Legion 13 team who have dominated the competition. And it was a pleasure to call it in English whilst I had a Ukrainian colleague at the ground broadcasting in Ukrainian, I think on YouTube, my work going out on Facebook in English. The mind boggles, Lee, because when I stopped calling back in 2011 before going into politics, I never dreamt of that sort of stuff. And out of the COVID crisis that's engulfed the world in the last couple of years, some good came about it with technology. And look, even what we're doing now and what other people are doing with podcasts and so forth, you know, it's been a real eye-opener to see technology changing from what my experience was with live television, thinking that was the be-all, end-all. But obviously, we've got different platforms now, and it's an exciting time for professional sport, for amateur sport, and to be involved in sport. And that includes the greatest game of all.
Did you have a Twitter account in 2011? Because you tweet yourself senseless now, don't you?
well, I'm trying to remember because politics is very different. People say, you know, we talk about, say, John Howard, the former Prime Minister, arguably our best Prime Minister since Curtin, who led the nation in Australia during our darkest days when bombs were falling on Darwin and other cities around the continent. It's stuff that my generation, our generation, and even the one before it don't understand unless you read about it, learn about it. John Howard didn't have Twitter and he didn't have Facebook. And I wonder whether Churchill. Well, that's Churchill, obviously, is going right back. But my point is, would they have survived? Would they have survived, though, in the Twitter sphere of today? So, you know, everyone's got an opinion, Lee. The late great Bob Fulton said something about opinions, which I'm not going to repeat because
something to do with the derriere.
Yeah, well, this broadcast is rated G, so I'm going to leave it there. I think people, Lee, if people are interested, they can Google it.
Yeah, mate. You and I both share opinions quite readily on socials, via one method or another. So I've no doubt at some point in this trilogy that he's going to be bigger than the Star Wars trilogy. We will butt heads at some point.
Hang on, are you saying we're going to come back and do more of this?
It depends. Depending on what we talk about, we might get kicked off.
Well, listen, we haven't got to half time yet. I might be looking to go to I might be looking to the interchange bench.
Mate, I'm going to hit you straight between the eyes with this one.
This will be good.
Rugby League World Cup 2021, but obviously it happened in 2022. Your reflection. Open question.
Go your hardest.
I've just given you the question. Open question. Your reflection.
What is it?
Your reflection.
What do I think of it?
Yeah.
What do I think of it? Well, I thought it was terrific in many, many ways. I've seen some of the viewing numbers that have come out of the UK with the BBC, and I thought it was tremendous. It was a missed opportunity for the host nation. They blew it, Lee, and I'm happy to delve into that. They really did blow it.
I've got that on the running sheet.
Yeah, sure. But I think the tournament was great. In hindsight, I'm disappointed. When you look back at when the UK has hosted World Cups before, you do have to question the reasoning behind the allocation of venues to certain cities across the country and whether they got that wrong. You know, could they have grown the game by taking games to other places? There was one game played in the Midlands in Coventry. I can't recall the crowd figure there, but you go back to 2 years ago and we had the worst weather. Your country, or the country of your birth, had the worst weather ever for an international rugby league tournament anywhere. And the crowd numbers probably were pretty good, all things considering, and they took matches beyond the borders of England, of Mother England. So, look, I think John Dutton and his team did a terrific job. I think it was a kick in the guts 12 months ago before the event or thereabouts when the Aussies and the Kiwis ganged up and said, stick it up your Jats cracker. They obviously had different doctors to rugby union and soccer and other sports. I still can't believe that...
Different wallets too, I think.
Well, I still can't believe the Federal Police and ASIO haven't investigated the NRL because of these great doctors that they've got, because it's probably in the national interest if we ever have another crisis down the track. But anyway, look, the Aussies and the Kiwis did make up by going to the event this year, and New Zealand were disappointing. I thought Michael Maguire's team should have done better after dodging a bullet against Fiji. I think the rise of Samoa was long overdue. They follow in the footsteps of the Red Army of Tonga. You know that. It's remiss of us, Lee, if we don't salute Jason Tamalolo. I remember him as a 17-year-old coming back on the plane from Auckland to Brisbane with me. He played in a curtain raiser in Rotorua.
Smelly town.
Yeah, beautiful people there. Beautiful people.
Great place. It's just that smell hits you when you get there.
Yeah, well, it's a smell that brings tourists in from around the world.
That's right.
And it's also a smell that the All-Stars are going to get used to with what's happening there in February, which I think is great stuff well done to the NRL. We often give the NRL a hard time for doing this and doing that and not doing this and not doing that. But I thought the World Cup was, reasonably successful. I think it was disappointing for the host nation. I think it was exciting for nations like Jamaica in the men's and Brazil in the women's. And a lot of good can come out of it. What we do need, though, is clarity and certainty. Right now, we don't know what's happening in the Middle East Africa Rugby League with the qualifiers for France for 2025. We don't know when they're happening next year. We know they're happening next year, but we don't know where exactly. We don't know when exactly. And the same goes for the Americas. And I'm sure our viewers in the United States and Canada and also in, Brazil and even in Jamaica, of course, they're interested to know what's going on. So I can't stress enough the importance to know that Troy Grant, the chairman of the IRL, I think he's been doing a great job under difficult circumstances. Has he got the respect of the NRL and Super League, the professional bodies? I think the NRL still need to show that they are genuinely interested in the affairs of international rugby league and can support the efforts of the IRL, because we need a strong international game and we are on the verge of greatness, Lee, as we go into this third decade of the 21st century. I think the best of international rugby league is yet to come.
I'm going to peel back some of the things that you said there, because you spoke about things on field and off field. So we're going to start with off field first. You made a statement. You thought it was a successful World Cup, or a pretty successful World Cup. I would argue that if you started the competition at the quarterfinals, I think from the day that Princess of Wales turned up at Wigan, and the crowd and the way England played that day, and then the quarterfinals after that, the semi-finals and the final, great stuff. The night before, Australia put quite a lot of points on Lebanon in front of not very many people. A lot of the World Cup was played in front of not very many people. Now, I know what you're going to come back with. You're going to say that the TV figures are a better reflection of success. But what about the optics, Jason? What about the optics of so many empty seats?
Dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. And where were the cardboard cutouts?
Yeah. There's more CDs and books behind you than there were at some of those grounds. So for those watching this on YouTube, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those listening, Jason is sat in front of, I assume he sat down anyway, in front of a litany of books and CDs. I've not seen CDs for a long time. I think CDs were out when you were last commentating. So you accept that.
Oh, secondly, for sure. Lee, it was embarrassing for the game. And I don't know how many people have said this. It was utterly embarrassing for the game. Yeah. And, for example, Australia playing Lebanon, it's hard to predict who's going to play in these quarterfinals. Like, you can second guess and whatnot. A lot of people thought that Samoa could beat England in the first game of the tournament. That included me. And how badly did we get that wrong? So it's hard to predict that Lebanon will play Australia. I can't believe the Aussies weren't given the opportunity to play more games in London. How many Aussies do you think live in Greater London?
You're bringing something else to the table now too, because so many of the fixture choices, the venue choices for me were unbelievable. I mean, Tonga versus someone in Middlesbrough. Now, on the flip, there's been a big legacy project from John Dutton and his team. So a lot of the venue choices were about legacy, about what can be established moving forward.
But Lee, I'm going to have it out with you here.
Please do.
They love talking about this legacy, and they love talking about this inclusiveness. But why isn't there where is the plan to include the Northeast, say Newcastle, if you like, back into Super League? Where is the plan to include? You want to talk about inclusiveness? You mean I'm quite sick of hearing about the inclusiveness, because I'm going to come down hard on them here. We had some of our British colleagues in broadcasting who got mixed up between the red team and the blue team when Samoa played Tonga. And I'm sick and tired of hearing the Barty described as the Batty. It actually made it drove me batty, right? But how come? Where is the legacy? Where is the plan to bring London back into Super League in the top flight? Where is the legacy to bring a team in from the Midlands into the top flight into professional rugby league? I have my doubts as to what sort of legacy will be left behind on the back of this stuff. I'm happy to be proven wrong.
I think you'll find it's a lot of tangible things. So, for example, I did a clinic at Portico in St Helens, and there was a legacy project there, and it was they'd put some money towards their new clubhouse. So there's one example.
Oh, for sure. And Lee, that's to be commended, right?
Yeah.
But if rugby league is such a great game, and I keep saying it's the greatest game of all, then why on earth is why does it have to be seen from the outside as a sport for the M62 corridor? Now, for our for our Antipodean audience, for those people watching in Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, we're talking about the M62 corridor that links the city of Hull in the east to Liverpool in the west, going across the Pennines, which is effectively the backbone of Mother England, the highest mountain range. Is that right? Across England, right?
Yeah,
between Lancashire and Yorkshire. So
geography with Jason Costigan.
Well, I was an A+ student. I was better at geography than I was at tackling. Otherwise, I might have played rugby league to some degree. But my point is, we've got to expand the game,
right?
And I've got to be critical here. The Rugby League World Cup organisers almost took the blueprint from the people, the Muppets that run Super League, as to where they were going to play the games. And they said to themselves, we're going to have respectable, if not very good or record-breaking TV audiences, but we'll sacrifice the attendance and let the optics be discussed by people like you and I and others for weeks and months ahead.
Everyone that I speak to. I was on the American coaching staff in 2013. I was in Bristol when we played the Cook Islands, and I'm going to bring the Cook Islands up a bit later too, and I'm sure the Americans will come into the conversation at some point too in this 4-hour special that we're going to do. The crowd that night at Bristol, it was persisting down, but it was a fantastic crowd. The place felt chockers. What's happened in Bristol since then? What's happened? Where's our Bristol Super League side? Where's our Bristol Championship or Championship one side? So there's a thing about legacy. But you made a point about we have to expand. Did you know that England did not play a game in Leeds? Did you know that England only played one game in a heartland area? So they played at Bolton, they played in the northeast at Newcastle, they played at Sheffield United, and they played at Emirates, Arsenal Stadium, right? Yeah. So what about looking after our locals? Now, I'm going to say 2 words to you. Coronation Street has never hidden the fact that it is northern, never hidden the fact that it's proud to be northern, never tried to market itself as anything else. Why do we have to be so obsessed with spreading the sport at the detriment of the north as well?
Well, I think we need to get the balance right, and we can. I've got the greatest respect, having lived in the UK, having worked at the Bradford Bulls when they were big-time league in the early days of Super League. I remember. Under the guidance of the legendary and the now late Peter Deacon, the greatest marketing genius ever seen in the history of Super League.
Gary Tasker was there too, wasn't he?
Well, GT was the chief executive, but the magic came from Peter Deacon with what he learned in the United States. He was a big fan of the razzmatazz that came with professional sport down under. And I turned up there and he offered me a job as the media manager. And it was, I would have loved to have stayed longer. I got the chance to call rugby league on what was then the Pulse of West Yorkshire. And, I got to write about the game for a number of publications as well. And I suspect that, in my heart of hearts, Lee, I've got the greatest respect for the game going back to 1895 and the founding fathers at the George Hotel who got together and said, let's get this Northern Union underway and they can stick it up their Jats cracker, right? But we need to get the balance right. And if you want money in the game, if the game wants to be seen to have credibility and national credibility, you need to have the traditional clubs like we do in the NRL with South Sydney and the Roosters and albeit a merged entity with St. George Illawarra, clubs like that have been there for a long time. But you've also got to have clubs in other markets to grow the game. If you want to have money to put into academy programs to unearth the next superstar, whether it's Ellery Hanley or Paul Sculthorpe or Kieran Cunningham or Sean Long or whoever it is. Well, we go through them, the galaxy of stars. Some of those players, I got to call Great Britain in my first international at the age of, I think I was 20 when they came out in 1992. So if you want to have that production line, that pipeline of players so that you're competitive, if not dominant, or knocking on the door every time there's an international trophy up for grabs, you need money. And the broadcasters, I hate to break it to people at Super League, and I think IMG are across this and well and truly across it, but whether people listen to them, that remains to be seen.
Well, did you know there was a similar review 50 years ago by a company in Manchester?
I saw that. I saw that recently. I saw that recently.
and that got nowhere.
But I'd like to see the recommendations that were adopted on the back of that review 50 years ago.
Recommend that they never come back again, probably.
And how many trophies have the Palms won since that review 50 years ago?
Correct. So I'll just wrap up the World Cup thing first, because we've talked about expansion, we talked about the ballot, and I totally agree with you. If we're going to go for something, did it produce a profit?
Well, I've asked that on Twitter this week. I think you noticed that. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, but a lot of the rugby league aficionados and journalists and commentators have gone on holidays. They're helping load up the sleigh for Santa, or doing what they're doing with their kids and having some time out. And you can't blame them for that, particularly those who've been travelling to the north of England covering the World Cup. And I was disappointed not to go. I was recommended by Spark Sport to be part of the international broadcast team, but certain other people thought otherwise, so we didn't get to go. And obviously it opened the door for me to call in Fiji and get some sun into me. So, but did it turn a profit? I'm waiting to see the answer to that question. You know, we know the audience numbers, or at least some of them, particularly with the BBC. We've seen the crowd figures, and some of them diabolical, as you know. Like some of those games at Kingston Park up in Newcastle, why weren't some of those games played elsewhere? I loved your comment about 2013 about Bristol. Where's the legacy from that? You know, to me, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked and a lot of lessons that will be learnt going into France in 2025.
England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland. England aren't even the second best team in the world anymore.
Well, then
Wales,
they're not England. Hang on, Lee. I'll actually take you to task on that. England is not even in contention for a medal.
No.
Well, I don't believe they will. I don't believe they will medal.
No, I agree. I've also listed my top 10 world rankings, and I'm going to compare them with yours soon. So, but England failed to win the semi-final, didn't make the final. Have made two finals in the last 2 decades: 1995 and under a guy called Wayne Bennett in 2017 in Brisbane. Or was it 2018? 2017. But more worrying for me is that Wales, Scotland and Ireland haven't featured in a knockout game for the last 20 plus years. In the last 2 World Cups, they have not beaten a Southern Hemisphere opposition. I'm going to throw it to you, JC. This isn't just an England failure. It's a British failure and it's a European failure, because France, that team was full of Super League players too. They didn't break a pot in the tournament. What is going on north of the equator?
Not a lot. We hear the term rebuilding. I knew you'd ask me about my top 10, and I've actually not got it right with me right now. So you've clipped me. I don't want to make excuses, but we're having some lighting issues, everybody, before we went on air, and it sort of consumed me from going to my the green room, as we call it, the green room.
Get your violins out, listeners.
Yeah. But Lee, what you're saying about like England? You mean England is not the top 3 nation in the world?
No.
To suggest they are is laughable, and no disrespect to Ireland and Wales and Scotland, but you know they're a long way off the pace. And you have to wonder about Wales. You mean it has happened before in the World Cup that I called back in 2008. I called that World Cup final where New Zealand won it for the first and only time. Wales, from memory, didn't qualify for that tournament. I suspect they are in danger of not qualifying for France in 2025. You know, some people would argue, of course, now that Australia has resumed its place at the top of the pile at number 1. Some people would suggest that Samoa deserved to be number 2. Some people would suggest that New Zealand deserved to be number 3. But England aren't in that 1, 2, 3 spot in that medal position, if you like. So England, I think the door has closed on them to win a World Cup. The chance was there on home soil, and they are losing their best players to the NRL, which is a good thing in many ways, but they need to fix their competition. And they continue to ignore the advice, not only of me, but other people who've weighed in on this debate. Shane Richardson's had a lot to say about the British game over a long period of time. Gary Hetherington's had a lot to say. Rugby league journalist Steve Mascord has had a lot to say. Guess what? The Muppets who run the game, the RFL, the Super League, they continue to ignore the advice. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the advice given to people in Darwin in 1942 that there were some planes coming towards Darwin and you better get organised. They ignored the advice and Japan bombed Darwin. They ignored the advice and they paid a big price for it. You know, people pay good money for advice, but you need to act on the advice. And Super League and the RFL, it's a mess and they need to wipe the slate clean, because if England is outside of that 1, 2, 3 scenario, and I know they are, and I believe you genuinely in your heart of hearts you agree with that.
They're not in my top three. They're not in my top three.
Well, what hope has Wales, Ireland, and Scotland and France got? Because where do their best players come from? The Super League. You know, I'm not saying Super League's rubbish, but the gap has never been wider and it needs to be rectified as a matter of urgency.
This dip in performance of Wales, Scotland, Ireland, France were already careering towards this abyss anyway, coincides with the existence of a European Federation. What are they doing, Jason? if they're not there to monitor and improve the performance of European nations in whatever level of the sport you want to look at, be it on field, off field, corporate, if they're not there to improve it, what are they there for and who's holding them accountable? Because some of the things, you know, the fact that Wales, Scotland and Ireland haven't played a knockout game for 20 years, the fact that they haven't beaten a Southern Hemisphere team for 8 years, 9 years, the fact that Britain or England haven't won an Ashes series or a World Cup for half a century, 50 years.
Well, Lee,
50 years.
Yeah, Lee, I'll tell you what, if I don't know if anyone knows what's happening at the end of next season or what the international program, I haven't seen any clarity there, but if I was running the Rugby Football League, I would want my England players, yes, it's nice to play Warrington against France in April next year, but England need to play against the best if they're going to get better. Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if they beat France in Wade Warrington in April next year, do you really think it's going to affect their international ranking?
No. And do you think it's going to impact the way they play against New Zealand or Australia? Or
well, if I'm England, at the grand final for Super League from memory is on the 14th of October next year. I would want to be undertaking a Southern Hemisphere tour to play, even if it's not against the Aussies, certainly against the Pacific Islands.
Play against Swifts in Ipswich or someone we need somebody that can compete with them.
Did you say the Baval Swifts?
Yeah.
Well,
Swifts, or they can play Logan Brothers or something.
You better explain for the international audience the level of, no disrespect, but you better explain who they are to everybody else.
So we've got the NRL, which is numero uno. Then you've got a tier underneath, the New South Wales Cup, the Queensland Cup. Then you've got a third tier underneath that, so the BRL in Brisbane, and I think is it still a Jim Beam Cup or something like that? Anyway,
Ron Massey.
That's it. Jim Beam. I'm about 20 years off there.
I think you've had a few JBs.
I was just going to say. Then underneath that, you've got a massive culture here of A-grade football, and Bavel Swifts are one of the teams in the Ipswich A-grade. So I thought, you know, it wouldn't surprise you if England came on a tour over here and a team in the Queensland Cup, the New South Wales Cup, or at the bottom end of the NRL got really close to rolling them. It wouldn't surprise you.
I've got no doubt.
Let's not forget, PNG beat Great Britain in 2019 in PNG. Now, the last time I checked, PNG weren't a team full of NRL players.
No. They're tough players, passionate players, and some skillful players. But you're right, they don't source their team lock, stock and barrel out of the NRL, and that was an embarrassing moment for Great Britain at the time. Coming back to my recommendation, if I'm England, I want to get back on the horse straight away. And after the grand final, I would want to probably play, in all honesty, I'd say, let's get out to the Pacific. Let's play Samoa. Let's play Tonga. Can we play New Zealand? What about Fiji? Go on a 4 or 5 week tour, because the England players need to play tough games against quality opposition.
Yeah.
And playing France in Perpignan in late October for a return test match, Luke Lacoste he'll love that. And Laurent Freycinet, he'll have a croissant or two salivating at the prospect of a home game and a good crowd. And I understand that.
Oui.
But England have to be playing against the best. Maybe they're scared of coming down under.
If England are the past, if France are the past, Samoa, Tonga, to an extent Fiji are the future, what of Australia? I think, personally, that was the worst Kangaroo side. And I mean this with all due respect. It was the least talented Kangaroo side that has taken the field in a tournament or an Ashes series, whatever the context may be, since the 1995 team that played in the World Cup under a split competition, and the Australians only sent their ARL-affiliated players.
That's right, yeah. And Lee, just for the younger audience watching the podcast who perhaps aren't great students or just don't know about the history of the game, that World Cup, the Centenary World Cup, which marked the centenary of the game in England in 1995, players from the Brisbane Broncos and the Cowboys, clubs like that,
Canberra.
Yeah, Penrith Panthers, the Canberra Raiders, they were not eligible. Well, apparently they were eligible and they were considered, but the reality was they were never chosen by the Kangaroos.
I tell you what, some people will, to ram this point home, though. Let's just name some of the players that would have been in those teams. So Glenn Lazarus, the Walters boys.
Alfie Langer.
Ricky Stewart would have still been running around.
Steve Ranoff, Bradley Clyde.
Steve Ranoff, yeah. These are players
Laurie Daly.
These are players that did not get picked for Australia.
That's right. And so players that, and don't forget, this had an impact on Queensland at State of Origin. That's why it's all part of folklore about Benny Ikin getting picked for Queensland, and Fatty Vorton, the coach, thought he was looking for an autograph and told him to rack off, and and all that sort of stuff. So coming back to what you said, Lee, I think you are spot on. This was the moment that Australia was vulnerable. And it wasn't our best team. In fact, it was our most vulnerable team, or as you've said, our weakest team. And that's with great respect to Tedesco and co. And I thought I thought he was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal for the Kangaroos.
Teddy's one of my boys. Teddy's one of my ex-players. I met with him and Jake for a lemonade at the Midland Hotel in Manchester, and I don't think I'm breaking Teddy's trust here if I tell you that there was a genuine concern and paranoia that they might not win the World Cup. And I think it drove them to perform. Even though it was not the most talented Kangaroo squad, I think they did their nation so proud. I think they did the jumper. They did the jumper proud.
Yeah, and you know what, Lee? You talk about leaving a legacy. What sort of a legacy, how inspiring was it, for players like, for Josh Addo-Carr, how many Indigenous kids in Australia do you think are fired up about playing rugby league because of... And you know what? What disappointed me with the broadcasters is that there was no mention about his First Nations history, that he come from Wiradjuri country in the Riverina of New South Wales. Famous for the city of Wagga, which means city of crows in the local language. But regardless of that, how many Indigenous kids, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids across the great southern land were inspired by the heroics and the theatrics and the blistering pace of the man they called the Fox, because I loved it, and I was so jealous that I wasn't calling the Fox on the run in the UK.
Another legacy I think the Aussies have left that might not have been as noticeable to the untrained eye, but I guess if any young players are listening or coaches, at half-time in that New Zealand game, if any doubts were creeping in to their heads, that would have been the first Australian side not to lift a World Cup or make a final since 1954, the very first competition. How many years had you been commentating then, Jason? No. Jokes, he's young. He's a young pup. But that at half-time in that game, and I like to call it squeaky bum time after the great Sir Alex Ferguson, the best British coach of football of all time, if you ask me. There was plenty of squeaky bum moments in that game, and they held their nerve, and they weren't clinical, but they dug deep. And one thing I will always say about Australians, and it's the same with your bloody cricket team, you are the best rubbish cricket team in the world. So when you're struggling, you're very hard to beat. And I think that Kangaroos side were just on that tip of potentially losing against New Zealand, but they just found something else. And it's like at half-time, they settled on things, they worked out, just focus on the basics, and they ended up finding the cheese in the defensive line, not quite himself, watching the worms on the floor, and that was the difference. When the back rower scored what ended up being the game-winning try. I think one of the great legacies of the Australian team was that desire in that game. Prior to that, in the group stages, they hardly conceded any tries.
Yeah, I will counter this by saying New Zealand lacked confidence going into that game because they got out of jail against Fiji, didn't they? They got out of jail big time.
Yeah,
they were lucky to win it. And I still say, and it'll become part of folklore, how on earth the video referee had an interpretation on that ball being ripped away, which effectively overturned the on-field decision. You know, where was the compelling evidence? I don't remember seeing compelling evidence. And if that call wasn't made, the Kangaroos would have played the Barty in the game you're talking about.
The big thing for New Zealand, from my point of view, I thought they were too structured. I think Kiwi players now, they've grown up on a diet of NYC. A lot of these players came through the NYC, and that Warriors side were always knocking at the top door of the NYC, weren't they? The New Zealand Warriors back then. So they're now, a lot of them are now NRL players, and therefore some of them are in the Kiwi side. I think there's a lot more flair in that team than Madge allowed them to use. I think they were too structured, and I did some analysis online. First of all, I did a post not long after the game saying that I thought Madge has done his time with the team. I think he's taken them as far as he can.
He asked me for your number.
Oh, you can have it. I'll speak to him about it. And I believe he's a great bloke, so you know, I'm sure he'd take it in the right spirit. And that's not to say he's not done a great job. He has done a great job. He got hold of them when they lost to Fiji in the 2017 World Cup in the quarterfinal. Was it 6-2 or 6-0 or something like that? So he's turned that ship around. But I also feel that the team has reached their limit under him. I thought they played well within themselves. Too structured, too readable, and people counted, well, yes, there were offloads and all this. I think some of the players were desperate to unleash a little bit, but they were too respectful of the coach and they had to stick within a structure.
Well, I tend to agree, and I remember the halcyon days of the Warriors and even the Kiwis, because that World Cup success in 2008, it came on the back of the arrival of players that came out through the early 2000s, if you like, the likes of Ali Lawatiti and Benji Marshall and players of that caliber that came to the fore, and their ability to promote the football, to play attacking, attractive rugby league, stuff that you probably wouldn't play week in, week out in a club competition. And so if you want to win a World Cup or a trophy, an international trophy, I tend to agree. I mean, coaching's not my forte, obviously. That's your business. But from my observation, Lee, I think what you're saying has got some validity, that they needed to get the genie out of the bottle and show some of that magic. And I think they were rather restrained, and that at the end of the day, they're probably lamenting what might have been, and rightly so.
So we spoke about the old guard. We briefly mentioned Samoa and Tonga. What do you see of their future? Samoa have achieved something brilliant.
Yeah.
I still am a little bit frustrated with how they played that first game. I am privy to quite a lot of information, and I can promise you they were very underprepared for that England game. Very underprepared. So read into that what you will.
Well, that's their own fault. That's their own fault. And, you know, and by the way, they weren't alone. How many other teams in the tournament were underprepared that didn't play a test match, an international leading up to it during the course of the year before the tournament? And you know what it comes down to? You mentioned about the European Rugby League. I don't want to pick on the European Rugby League. And I mean, I think David Butler, I'll push back about with what some of the stuff you said about the ERL. If they haven't got the money and the resources to do stuff, their hands are tied.
Make some money.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I called the European B tournament or the Euro B tournament last year involving Serbia, who won the event, obviously, or the competition, in a 3-team competition. It was Serbia, Russia, and Ukraine. In fact, you're speaking to, I think, the person who broadcast the last sporting fixture between a Russian team and a Ukrainian team.
I've refereed a test match in Russia. There you go.
Yeah, but was Ukraine playing?
No. England under 21 women versus Russia in Kazan.
Yeah, well, I haven't been to Kazan, but I did call the match between Russia and Ukraine only a few months before Russian tanks crossed the border. And I think these competitions have got all the merit under the sun. And you're right, they need to make some money. So, like next year, there's Serbia have been promoted to Euro A. Will it be on television? Will it be on free-to-wear? Will it be pay-per-view? When will it be on? What about Euro B? The games that I'm talking about that I had the privilege of calling last year, well, they were live-streamed. Wouldn't it be great to see them on television, on Serbian television? Now, I can't call the game in Serbian or any other foreign language, Russian, Ukrainian, but my point is broadcasters out there are looking for product, and you've got to be aggressive in the market. It's like signing players. If Tim Sheens and co are just in a coma, do you think they're going to get new players and new blood to come to Concord to try and lift them out of the cellar?
We talked about the fall of Wales, the fall of Ireland, the fall of Scotland. I know it feels like I'm going back, but the thing that links is that they were both faced. So everybody in Europe, and you mentioned Dave Butler. Look, I don't know Dave, but I got no problem with any of these individuals. I've spoken to some of them and no problem personally, but we all love the game. Wales, in particular, were a team that played in World Cup semi-finals. They played in a World Cup semi-final in 1995, backed up again in the year 2000. The obvious reason why it doesn't happen anymore is that rugby union went professional. So we didn't get the union converts. I don't accept that as an excuse. Somebody somewhere should have seen that coming, strategized, and started genuine youth development programs. And if they don't have the cabbage to do it, you raise the cabbage to do it. There's clubs in the amateur sphere in England. There is clubs in what essentially is the amateur scene in Australia that have more money than the European Federation. And they raise it themselves. And they go out and get sponsors, and they go out and do raffles and fundraising initiatives. It's about initiative. And that is the key thing I am crying out for.
Look, you've got to be hungry. You've got to be hungry. And I will say this, Lee. I will say this. Wales and Scotland and Ireland, they are crying out for a Super League team. And I believe the money, the investment potential is there. You've got to go and find these people. It's not my job to go and find these people. It's not. Could it be my job or role? Well, potentially, yes. If someone said to me, listen, if you've got a big mouth, why don't you go and do it? Why don't you go and fix it? Well, I'm happy to have a cup of tea and a scone and discuss that. But I love calling the game. I love calling the game, as you know, particularly the international game. And there are kids in Wales and Scotland and Ireland, I'm sure, that would look up to playing and look to a career in rugby league if they had a team in their own backyard, particularly, when it's not the dominant code. We always had kids in North Queensland who wanted to play professional rugby league before the Cowboys. But now there's a local platform for them to play in their own backyard instead of people having to go away. And so my challenge to people in the British Isles is go and find the people who are willing to invest in a team, but make sure you underpin the investment with certainty. You cannot, for goodness sake, have a team from South Wales. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that Wales has had a team, unlike Scotland and Ireland. You cannot have a situation where if you own the team, let's say you and I put the money up, and then our investment goes up in flames because of some pissant team on the M62 corridor winning a big game in the second tier and gazumping us because of promotion relegation. Can you, like the Australian model, I'm not saying everything about the Australian game is perfectly, but what the British have got to understand, All right, and I appreciate Ireland's not part of Britain, right? But what people in the Northern Hemisphere have got to get through their heads is that, can you imagine the NRL, Lee, with no Broncos, no Canberra Raiders, no Auckland Warriors, as I still call them, no Melbourne Storm, no North Queensland Cowboys?
Not in this modern market, no.
Can you imagine what the television rights, the broadcast rights would be like if those teams weren't part of the NRL competition? I'll tell you who would love it is the AFL. And people in the Northern Hemisphere and in New Zealand and the Pacific Islands probably don't understand what I'm getting at. I know that you do. They would love it. And conversely, north of the English Channel, rugby union loves the fact that the London Broncos aren't in Super League anymore. And the Welsh Rugby Union will never admit to it. But they love the fact that there's no Super League team,
of course,
in the biggest market, probably in Cardiff. And it goes on and on. They love it. And so rugby league is its own worst enemy.
We've spoken a lot about the 2021/2022 World Cup, but what of the 2025 one? USA, are they going to get there?
Well, I'm not convinced, because recently as, just hours before we hooked up for this podcast, I asked someone in the USA, and I called a game last year in the USA out of Kannapolis, North Carolina, and that was involving the people who were behind the ill-fated North American Rugby League. Now, we all know about the North American Rugby League. They had 2 failed attempts to get off the ground, and it came to absolutely diddly squat. Now, the United States is an absolute dog's breakfast in terms of governance. I know that they've had the review and whatnot, but all we've seen are pieces of paper. I still can't work out what's happening in the United States. Rugby League has been pushing their, particularly going back to 1987 with State of Origin coming to California. A lot of people today, the generation of today, are blissfully unaware that State of Origin actually went across the Pacific all those years ago. No Broncos in those days, Lee. No Newcastle Knights. The world was very different, right? Wally Lewis was still the king, and on it went. So we've had so many false dawns with the United States. I tell you what, it'd be remiss of me if we didn't acknowledge the work of Jamaica. You look at the first world economy of the United States, the investment in rugby league there over the years, with the Kangaroos playing in places like Philadelphia, with what happened with the Kiwis playing in Denver, in Colorado, State of Origin in California. We've had some events in North America over the last 3.5 decades. What about little Jamaica on that island? And I have a Jamaican connection. One of my forebears was born in Jamaica, and I'm very proud of that. And they came out to Australia to start a new life, and via New Zealand, I might add. So Jamaica, what they've achieved in getting to Rugby League World Cup 2021 was phenomenal. They were everyone's second favourite team. Let's not forget that. I know that you haven't forgotten it, but I want to say it. And nothing would please me more than to go to Kingston to see rugby league myself there, because I think it's a beautiful thing. And we talk about why, or questioning the reasoning behind the Kangaroos not playing in London. Why on earth didn't the games officials and the Rugby League World Cup organisers, why didn't they cash in on the big Caribbean population and Caribbean community in South London?
There's also one in Leeds, though, to be fair.
Well, to be fair, sure. But how many people would live in South London who have a connection to the Caribbean? Leeds is a big place, but you and I know London is a much, much bigger place. And if you wanted to promote rugby league in the capital, Jamaica playing its home matches in London or South London would have been phenomenal, and it would have got media talking in London and talking about Rugby League World Cup that doesn't involve England. That's the key bit.
We're going to play two games now, Costo. We're going to use the older world rankings I'm going to go through some teams, and you're going to tell me if you think they're going to be in the 2025 World Cup or not, and maybe give some background to our listeners and viewers on that. And then after that, I'm going to give you my top 10, the Addison world rankings, and you're going to challenge me, and let's
get into it.
We'll have a metaphorical blue.
This will be good. Good.
Okay. We know New Zealand, Tonga, England, Australia, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Samoa, Serbia. currently ranked 8th, according to what I've just found online. Are they going to play in 2025?
I think Serbia will make the World Cup.
What's going on there domestically?
Well, I think their competition with what I've seen with Partizan and Red Star will form the basis of their national team. I think what's been done on the ground in recent years is conducive to Serbia qualifying. They obviously need to do well and step up in company in Euro A next year. But, I'm quite impressed with what I've seen. And I think Serbia, I think they're a team to watch. And I think that they'd be surprised if you see a couple of NRL players coming out of the woodwork to help them get there. Watch this space.
Malta.
No chance. Look, I'm a big fan of the Maltese Knights. I think they have been unbelievable promoters of international rugby league. And David and his front office team have done a terrific job, not only with the men, but they've got pathways happening with their youth and obviously their women's. But the small island nation of Malta, and as I said at the top of our discussion, I had a Maltese stepfather. I have not one but two Maltese Australian sisters. And I come from a very strong Maltese community in North Queensland. My heart says I'd love to see them do well, but I can't see them coming within a ball's roar.
Greece.
Well, Greece showed plenty of fight. Steve Georgalis, whilst he remains in charge, nothing would surprise me. And I thought the way they presented themselves and also got some of their Greek people in the mother country behind them was so inspiring. I'm not convinced Greece will be there. I suspect there's every chance they could be in a battle with teams like Serbia to make it, but I wouldn't rule them out of backing up in 2025.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but if you made the quarterfinals, you automatically qualify for 2025, don't you?
That's right. So Lebanon's a shoo-in.
Lebanon's a shoo-in. Ireland, though, aren't.
I beg your pardon?
Ireland aren't.
No, I don't expect Ireland to qualify.
Okay. Holland?
Poland?
Holland. Netherlands?
The Netherlands. No chance. I think Joran Schoenmaker, a big shout out to Joran. I hope I pronounced his name right. I saw him light up the field at Bodrum in Turkey there in that European competition. Unbelievable player. Nice young man from what I can see. But I don't think the Dutch Lions can get close.
Scotland.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to qualify. In fact, I'll bet you anything Scotland will not qualify for France 2025.
Wales.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to qualify. I'll give Ireland an outside chance of qualifying, but I think Wales, they were gallant in their performances, whereas Scotland just didn't have the cattle. They may as well trotted out the Edinburgh Eagles.
Italy.
Spaghetti rugby. Oh, I love it. I love the Azzurri. Is there another Tedesco out there? Here's hoping. I think Leo Epifania would love to think so. Taz Bateri and the coaching staff. I'd probably say that Italy, Greece and Serbia are going to be locked in a fight to the death to try and qualify. So, I wouldn't rule Italy out either. I think Italy would have to fancy themselves of going again.
Czech Republic.
No chance.
Turkey.
No chance. Some interesting developments in Turkey, particularly, with new teams emerging and whatnot. And I've got an auntie who lives in Turkey, and I have first cousins, relatives literally in Turkey, Lee. And so I take a great interest in Turkish rugby league affairs, more than what people would realise. I think Girol, who's running the show there, who's now on the European board, I think that's good for Turkey. They need to play more internationals, but they need more resources. I think it's premature to think that Turkey can get to France in 2025. But, the Turks will play in Australia again next year on Anzac Day against the Australian Defence Force, as I understand. So there's some exciting things happening in Turkish rugby league, and I wish them well, but I can't see them getting to France.
I'm going to flip the next two around because I want to talk about number 20 after I've spoken about number 21, or after I've asked about number 21, should I say. Jamaica, will they qualify?
I've got my doubts, but as I understand, the top 2 teams from the Americas will go through to France. And I don't know if that's been met with great enthusiasm by people across the Atlantic.
No.
I think the look on your face would suggest they are not happy one iota. and for that matter, the Cook Islands is not happy about what's happening as well.
I was just going to say they're the next one. Do you think they're going to fall off the perch?
Yeah, I can't. Well, yeah, I think I agree. I think the writing's on the wall for the Cookies. It breaks my heart to say that. Tony Iro is a former colleague of mine from Sky Television. He's a great friend of mine. I have enormous respect for Tony, his brother Kevin the Beast. I think Charles Carlson, who's the chairman of the Cook Islands Rugby League, is doing a fair job under the most difficult circumstances. They've got their nines coming up next month. I wish them well, but if they could get players, their best players, like Val Holmes, who knows? If you get your best players at the right time, Lee, anything's possible. But I think the writing's on the wall for the Cook Islands. As for the Americas, as I said, I'm pretty sure the top 2 teams will go through. And so Jamaica, if that's the case, you'd have to think they're going to have the South American winners covered. And so then it's either them in a 3-way battle against the United States and Canada.
Lee's World Rankings. Number 1, Australia.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no argument anywhere on the planet. And if there is, you should go to a hospital for a CAT scan.
Number 2, New Zealand.
I'm not convinced about that. I'm not convinced about it. Samoa got to the final, not by fluke, with limited preparation or poor preparation. You touched on it earlier in our discussion. And so I'm not convinced. I probably would tend to think that Samoa deserves number 2.
To be fair, Samoa didn't have to play Australia in a semi-final.
No, but who's to say they couldn't beat them?
And this is also a result of the previous ranking system going into the tournament that had Australia at 4th, was it?
Well, they weren't where they wanted to be, and then had a lot of people talk. It had a lot of people talking, Lee.
Number 3, not least the players, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Number 3, I've got Samoa.
Yeah, and I understand that. So I probably disagree with you there. You've got New Zealand at number 2. I'd probably put the Kiwis at number 3.
Number 4, England.
Yeah, I'm not convinced about that either. I probably would put Tonga at number 4.
Tonga are my number 5.
Yeah, I bet. And then I would probably put England at number 5. There you go.
So why, if Tonga went out in the quarters and England went out in the semi-finals, why would you change that? And then you're saying Samoa got to the final, they should be above New Zealand.
Well, I think Tonga's a better team than England.
Number 6, Fiji.
Yeah, for sure and for certain.
Number 7, PNG.
I agree with that.
Number 8, Lebanon.
Well, who am I to disagree?
Number 9, Ireland. Number 10, France.
Well, Jim Reynolds will be ringing you after this podcast to say thanks very much, because we basically poo-pooed the home nations, and you've got the Wolfhounds at number 9. I'm not going to push back on that, and I think Laurent Freysinus probably can count himself lucky that you've got him and his team in the top 10. I'll put it that way.
Well, who would you put in their place?
Well, I'm happy to throw up a suggestion.
Well, the ones who could go in there.
Go on.
So that we've got rid of Serbia.
Yeah.
Then Malta. We're also 10th.
Yeah. Well, I don't think Malta's going to beat France.
No, Greece.
But I tell you what, Serbia playing France in Belgrade. I'd love to call that one. I'd love to call that.
Greece wouldn't.
Well, I think Greece playing France. You know, I mean, I don't think, to be honest, France don't want to go to Athens to play Greece. Now that the game's been recognised by the Greek government and the Greek authorities, and that the Greek team isn't hiding from the police nor anyone playing rugby league in Greece. That's a great thing, isn't it, for rugby league? That if you're a rugby league player up until about a few months ago in Greece, you could be put under arrest. Unbelievable. But France, Lee, in all honesty, if you're playing for France, do you really want to go to Athens to play the Greeks after what we saw in the World Cup? Would you be nervous about that? Because I would be.
I would be nervous if I was French leaving my own shores to play anywhere because they've never had a great record overseas, or certainly not in my lifetime anyway.
Well, I remember covering France when the likes of Gilles Dumas and Patrick Ontard were playing in the halves 32 years ago. In fact, I covered their first game on the Eastern Seaboard on their Australian tour in 1990. And you are right, they struggled to beat Queensland Country in Cairns. I was covering the game for News Corp, or one of its papers, the Townsville Bulletin. And no disagreement from me. So coming back to your top 10, I respect your top 10. I don't have too much pushback on it. I'd keep the French in the top 10, but I think the likes of Serbia and Greece and even Italy outside the top 10, I think France would be nervous of going on tour playing those countries. If France had to go at the end of next season, Lee, and play a test match in the north of Italy, a game in, say, Athens against the Greeks, and finish up with a match in Belgrade against the Serbs, well, if you're Coach Freysanus, you'd be looking to win all three. But imagine if you slipped up here or there. You wouldn't hear the end of it.
So in the Addison World Rankings, there's 6 Southern Hemisphere sides and 4 Northern. That's putting Lebanon in the north because I believe it's right near the equator, isn't it, kind of thing? So it's
it's well north of the equator.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
As I said, I was better at geography than
yeah, correct. Yeah. I thought it was in between though, whether it's north or south, or is it well in the northern hemisphere?
Yeah, it's well in the northern hemisphere, and it sits under the Middle East Africa Rugby League banner. Don't forget, there's an argument that Africa should have its own team going to the World Cup, and that's the other thing too. I'm not sure where this is at because I need to go and check the fine print here because Lebanon are automatic qualifiers for France 2025. There's going to be a qualification tournament, I believe, in South Africa next year. There's a lot going on in Africa at the moment. I was talking to people in East Africa in the last couple of days. Kenya had its National Day this week. And there's some green shoots appearing in Uganda with some great work going on there at the Wales Rugby League Academy, about half an hour outside the capital, Kampala. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after what happened in Accra in Ghana. Cameroon were unlucky in many ways because they got squeezed out of that with not enough players and mitigating circumstances. So I'm a big fan of African Rugby League. We can talk about this perhaps on another podcast because for me, for the Super League and the British clubs, Africa is the promised land.
The other thing with Lebanon, mostly Southern Hemisphere players.
They're mostly Southern Hemisphere players. Yeah, of course, because they're playing in the best competition in the world.
So it's, in theory, we've got 7 Southern Hemisphere.
Well, I'll rephrase that. We have a big Lebanese community, particularly in our biggest city in Sydney. And if they're not playing in the best competition, they're playing in the feeder competition. So I don't want to. I'll just correct myself there because they're not all playing in the NRL. Obviously not. Not everyone's the same standard of player as Mitchell Moses or Mansour and players of that caliber. Kiraz at the back, he will be a player to watch. We talk about players coming out of the World Cup. The Canterbury Bankstown fullback, watch this space. I reckon he will be an excitement machine at the back for the Bulldogs in 2023.
The hooker from Fiji too.
Well, he's a phenomenal player. You're talking about the backup hooker, are you not?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because Api Coruscant is obviously versatile. He can play at 5'8", or he can play at 9. So, look, at the end of the day, Lee, if Super League needs to get its structure right because you will have players from Africa because of Africa's connection to Europe and the UK wanting to play in that part of the world, whether it's in top flight in Super League or in France or second tier, whatever. And so you need to suck the best talent in. And same from the Americas, particularly from the Caribbean. Big Caribbean community in London, and as you say, proportionately not insignificant in West Yorkshire. That's where the future, that's where the pipeline of players exists, where players want opportunity and want economic opportunity. I've seen some highlights of players playing in Kenya, in East Africa, to West Africa. I'm not the only one. And they've got some raw talent. And I hope that we see more of Africa on the international league scene in the years to come, and I believe we will. And I think that tournament next year, I believe involving Ghana and obviously the winners, Nigeria and South Africa, will be something to look forward to. With my understanding, Lee, is that the winner will go to France, even though Lebanon's part of that MEA Rugby League umbrella. They qualify because, as you say, they made the quarterfinals, but there'll be another place for an African team. That's my understanding. I think that's a good thing.
Mate, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea. I don't eat scones because I've got a Polish shirt on. I might have some gnocchi. Have you ever had gnocchi?
I love a bit of gnocchi. My father, well, yeah. My cuisine is quite international, I can tell you, Lee. And when I lived in the village for a week in Fiji, we ate basically everything from the village or from the sea 95% of the time.
Nice.
And I loved it.
Nice. Great talking, mate. We'll do another 2 for over the Yuletide period.
Over the off season, or yes. some would say the silly season. But listen, all jokes aside, probably remiss of me not to just jump in now as we finish up to wish your many fans and viewers and subscribers and those who followed you for a long time and respect you for your contribution to the world of coaching, and those who've put up with my contribution today. Wish you all a very Merry Christmas, happy holy and safe Christmas, and all the best for 2023. And great to be with you, Lee.
And same to you, sir. Take care.
Good on you, mate.